So today we're gonna finish the chapter on the era of the Talmud, when the Talmud was finalized and published, right? Also known as the era of the Amoraim. Amoraim is that era that came after the Tannaim, which ended with the publication of the Mishnah. All right. So what is the Talmud? We saw how it was put together. Sorry? We saw how the Talmud was put together over the course of the 60-year reign of Rav Ashi, right? We said every year, twice a year, for an entire month, all the Hachamim would assemble in the yeshivot in Babel, and they would discuss the Mishnah. They would prepare all their arguments for 5 months, right? All their arguments and commentaries they prepare for 5 months, and then they would meet up for 1 month. Every 6 months they do this, and they discuss an entire tractate of the Mishnah. And so over the course of the 60 years of Rav Ashi, while he was president of the yeshiva, they completed the entire Mishnah twice. They did 2 full rounds of the Mishnah. And so Rav Ashi started to put this all together, all these discussions. He put them together and he composed what is known as the Talmud Bavli. All right, so what is the purpose of the Talmud? All right, ve'inyan shenei haTalmudim. Right, the purpose of the 2 Talmuds. We said there's 2. There's the earlier one that was composed in Eretz Israel, called the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem or the Palestinian Talmud, as opposed to the Babylonian Talmud, right? So the purpose of both of these Talmudim is upirush divrei ha-mishnah uviur amukoteha, right? Pirush divrei ha-mishnah. So Pirush is commentary on the Mishnah, and Biur also means an explanation of the Mishnah. So what's the difference between Pirush and Biur? Well, we said the Mishnah itself was very, very condensed, right? Every sentence in the Mishnah includes many, many other halachot in it. Right, and we gave as an example the first Mishnah says Me'ematai Korin Kiryat Shema Ba'aravin. Right, from what time, from when could you start saying the Shema in the evenings? Says Misha'a Kohanim Nichnasin Le'echol B'Trumatan Ad Sof Ha'Shamura Harishona. From the time that the priests gather to eat their terumah, right, which they have to do while they are in a state of purity, until the end of the first Ashamura. Ashamura is the first, the night is divided into 3 parts. So that first part of the night, that's the time that you have to say Kiryat Shema in the evenings. And later on in the Gemara, they try to understand, what does this mean from the time that the Kohanim come in? I said, the time the Kohanim come in, they can only come in after sunset, or after the stars come out. And when is the Ashamura Rishonah? And why is the Mishnah tying in the Kohanim coming to eat dinner with the time that you're supposed to say Kiryat Shema? So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi in the Mishnah, he tried to put a lot of things together in order to take this entire library of halachot that we have and put it into a composition that people can study off by heart. So, Pirush Divrei HaMishnah, Pirush comes to the word lifros, right? Lifros, mapa ala shulchan, right? You have a table and you wanna put a tablecloth on it, you spread it out. So the first thing that the Talmud comes to do is to spread out, extract everything from the Mishnah, lay out the Mishnah for everybody. Uviur, viur comes from the word be'er. Be'er is a well. On the one hand, we want to extract and open and spread out everything. On the other hand, we also want to go deep into every single thing that is mentioned in the Mishnah, which is a very, very laborious task, and it took a very long time to do and to compose into the Talmud. All right, so Pirush Divrei HaMishnah, we want to extract the Mishnah, decompress the Mishnah, and then delve deep into each one of those halachot that were alluded to in the Mishnah. In addition to that, that is the primary, we'll say that is the primary objective of the Talmud. In addition to that, udvarim shenithaddeshu bechol bedin ubedin mimot Rabbeinu HaKadosh ve'ad chibur Talmud. In addition to that, they also want to include everything, every new instance, every new case, every new law that developed from the times of the Mishnah, from when the Mishnah was published until the end of the times of the Amoraim, every court with their new laws to put it into the Talmud, include it into the Talmud. Okay? Umishnei Talmudim, and from the two Talmuds, the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, Umina Tosefta, and also from the Tosefta, which we saw was written by the student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, right? Rabbi Hiya, Umisifra, Umisifre, Umina Toseftot, right? And all this, the Toseftot is what we would call the Baraitot, all the Tannaim and Amoraic literature, right? That developed over those years. Mikulam itbaer ha'asur ve'hamutar, right? From all of these sources together, right? And these are all in the Talmud Bavli, right? But not everything was necessarily quoted in the Talmud Bavli, and the Rambam here is telling us how he made Pesach Halacha. He says, from everything that's written in the Talmud, and the Tosefta, and the Sifra, and the Sifre, from all of this literature together, Mikulam idbaer ha'asur ve'hamutar. From all this, we will learn what is forbidden and what is permitted for us to do, right? Hattameh ve'hattahor, anything that is impure and anything that is pure, ve'hayav ve'apatur, right? And those who are liable for punishment for transgressing a certain, doing a certain avera, ve'hapatur, or those who are exempt from punishment, ve'akasher ve'apasul, right? What is good and what is bad, what you're allowed to eat, what you're not allowed to eat. Kemo she'etiku ish mipi ish mipi Moshe miSinai, right? As was transmitted one generation to another, right? One head of the Sanhedrin of the Supreme Court to the next, all the way back to Moshe, who received the Torah from Sinai. And previously we saw how the Rambam traced back the tradition from Rav Ashi, the publisher of the Talmud, or the father of the publisher of the Talmud, 40 generations all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, who received the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Sinai. All right? In addition to that, גם יתבאר מהם דברים שגזרו חכמים ונביאים שבכל דור ודור. And also in the Talmud, you know, we have all the laws that we received that was mentioned in the Mishnah. And the Talmud will go a further step and say, by the way, this law, it wasn't recorded, it wasn't received from Moshe, but it was enacted in a later generation, maybe in the times of the prophets, right? Like Netilat Yadayim, that was instituted by Shlomo. So it wasn't like Yehoshua and even Shemuel Hanavi, they didn't have this law of Netilat Yadayim. But in times of Shlomo HaMelech, they instituted Netilat Yadayim. Right, but the laws of Netilat Yadayim are mentioned in the Mishnah, but it's brought anonymously. So all these laws that developed over the generations, the Talmud will also tell you what their source was. La'asot siyag la-Torah, anything that was enacted in a later generation from Moshe, for the purpose of making a boundary so that you don't transgress the Torah. Right? There's a mitzvah. We spoke about this much earlier in the course. There is a mitzvah that the court has to enact and to institute new laws in order to prevent people from transgressing biblical laws. Right? She'amar asu mishmeret lemishmarti. Right? Make my mishmeret, the Torah that I have to guard you, make another boundary to guard people from transgressing this Torah. For instance, with Kiryat Shema, already in the first Mishnah that we have a good example, right, where the Chachamim say Kiryat Shema you could do only up until midnight. All right, but later on in the Talmud, right, when they start to analyze this halacha, it turns out, actually, even in the Mishnah itself, it says, no, really, you could do your Kiryat Shema all night long. However, Hachamim, they said you could only do it up until midnight. Why? This way people, they don't go to sleep early or, go to sleep before midnight and forget to do it. And I say, oh, well, I have all night to do Kiryat Shema, so I'm not worried. I got plenty of time. And they end up falling asleep and not doing Kiryat Shema. All right, so this is a mitzvah that the court has, and in the Talmud, it'll tell us all these laws that they weren't original laws received from Moshe and Sinai, but they were later on instituted in order to be a safeguard to not transgress the Torah itself. And also the customs that developed over time. That too, the Talmud will also explain to us that takanot shehitkinu, right, and all the provisional laws that they enacted, or shenahagu bechol dor vador, that developed over every single generation. As the court of each generation saw fit to institute. Right? Because we are not allowed to deviate from these decrees of the Hachamim. Shne'emar lo tasur mikol hadavar asher yagidu lecha yamin usmo. Right? Do not deviate from the instructions of the Supreme Court, from what they instruct you, not to the left and not to the right. V'chen mishpatim v'dinim piliyim. Right? So here in this paragraph over here, that Rambam is taking us all the way back to the beginning of the course when we were talking about the authorities of the Hachamim and the responsibilities of the Supreme Court. Right? So in addition, everything that was a din mufla, if you remember what a din mufla is, these are laws, cases that came to the court that the law wasn't specified in that case, and the Hachamim needed to make a decision. And so what would they do? They had certain tools at their disposal, right? They have the 13 midot. This is the 13 midot שהתורה נדרשת בהן, right? We saw klal uprat, right? For as an example, and all these kinds of laws are called din mufla, meaning there's a biblical mitzvah, right? There's a commandment in the Torah, and we don't necessarily have a masoret on certain details of that commandment, right? For instance, we saw Kiddush, right? It says Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, right? The Kadesho, and then but it says, okay, so how do you keep the Shabbat? It says Zachor. How do you remember the Shabbat? It's not specified in the Torah. How do you remember the Shabbat? And the Hachamim said, Zochrehu ala yain. All right, so you must remember it with a glass of wine, and that is the source for the Kiddush. And that wasn't something that was received from Moshe, but it was an interpretation of a later Beit Din. And that falls under the category of a din mufla. V'chen mishpatim v'dinim pil'iyim. Pil'iyim means mysterious. Mysterious because they weren't specified by the Torah. Shelo kibelu otan min Moshe, which wasn't received in an oral tradition from Moshe. V'danu bahen beit din gadol shel oto hador. However, when a case like this came before the Supreme Court, they convened and they had to discuss and they had to decide and come up with a verdict. What is the meaning of this mitzvah, and how are we going to practice it? B'midot shehatorah nidreshet bahen, right? Using the 13 midot, the 13 general rules of how to extract a halacha from the written text. Upasku otan hazechinim, and the Hachamim of that generation, of that court, they settled the law. And they decided, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it with a glass of wine. Vegameru shehadin kachu, right? And they published it. This is, this is how everybody needs to practice the mitzvah of commemorating the Sabbath day. Everybody needs to do it with a glass of wine. Hakol hiber Rav Ashi b'Talmud. All of these things that we mentioned, right, today, all of these things were put together in the Talmud by Rav Ashi, miyemot Moshe ve'ad yamav. Everything from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu until the days of Rav Ashi. V'nityahed Rav Ashi lechaberam. Right, we're moving on to a different source of Maimonides. He says Rav Ashi, he designated himself. He went into he went into like meditation. We say he separated himself in order to focus on this project. Nityahed Rav Ashi lechaberam v'ra'a la'asot divrei kol mi shaya achar Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Right, and he took an example from Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Yehuda HaNasi. What did he do when he put the Mishnah together? Right, he collected everything that was said that he had at his disposal in his times, and he put it into one book, and he published that. And so Rav Ashi says, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Asaf kol shemuot ba'alei shemuot. Right? He collected all of the traditions that the Hachamim, we said there was big controversy up until the times of Rabbeinu HaKadosh of putting the oral law into writing. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he had at his disposal certain traditions. But then, from his time onwards, everybody, once the Mishnah was accepted, and this whole idea of even putting oral traditions into writing was accepted, and all their teachings were already now collected into published books, right? So a lot more things developed over these generations. And when everybody would convene in the Yerhei Kala, right, come to the yeshivot twice a year, and they would bring with them all their teachings and all their hidushim, right? So Rav Ashi now has a lot more material to work with. With divrei iyun shel hame'ainin ufirushei hamefarshim, all these extra commentaries are developed on the Mishnah, and on the Tosefta, and on the Sifra and Sifrei, ubirer kabbalot ve'asefam, right? And this is one of the main keys of the purpose of the Talmud, is we're going to go through all the traditions of all the students and all the teachers, and we are going to authenticate them all. Ubirer hakabbalot ve'asefam. Right? He collected and they authenticated all of the traditions that there were. וכללה ידיעתו את הכל במה שחננו השם מאורך הרוח ואהבת הלימוד. Right? And his knowledge, he was a very, very wise Chacham. He was the president of the yeshiva, of the Supreme Court. It wasn't really, didn't have the status of the Supreme Court, but it was the parallel to the Supreme Court in the capital of the Jewish people at the time in Babel, right? So his knowledge was extreme. He was very, very wise, and after authenticating everything, he was the perfect person in order to put this Talmud together. וחיבר התלמוד וקבע מטרתו בו 4 דברים. Right? And he made the purpose of the Talmud 4 main objectives. As we said before, ביאור המשנה, explaining the Mishnah, וכל הפירושים השונים שנאמרו על לשונות המשנה, and all of the new commentaries that developed over the times on the specific formulations in the Mishnah, she'en lahem ichra, and anything that didn't have, it wasn't a settled law. There's many disputes recorded in the Mishnah. However, the Mishnah itself doesn't say, halacha is according to Rabbi Akiva, right? It'll bring 2 different opinions, and it'll move on to the next thing, because the purpose of the Mishnah wasn't to settle the law, but to have a base where everybody can refer to, a base reference for everybody to study up by heart. And so the purpose of the Talmud is to now settle the law and decide what halacha, who halacha is according to, right? So if there's a mahloket between Rabbi Akiva and say Rabbi Ishmael, so the Talmud will tell you halacha is according to Rabbi Akiva. V'ta'anat kol mefaresh al havero, right? And what is the reasoning of every opinion against the other? And the Talmud, the Sugiyot and the Talmud are going to analyze every opinion and the reasoning of every opinion, uvirur hata'ana hatzodeket, right? And to find which is the correct opinion, or what is the majority opinion. V'zohi hamatara ha'ikarit b'matrotav, right? And this is the primary objective of Rav Ashi in publishing the Talmud. V'hasheni, and the second, pesak halacha ki divrei had ha'cholkin, right? To decide, to decree what the halacha is according to who. Shenihliku b'mishnah, right? 2 different opinions in the Mishnah. Which opinion are we going to accept for halacha? Or befirusha, or in an explanation to the Mishnah. Or b'ma shenilmad mimena, or b'ma shedamuhu ledivrei ha'mishnah. Right? Or anything, or any commentary that developed later between any dispute between 2 hachamim that developed from the times of the Mishnah until Rav Ashi, how are we settling the law according to which opinion? V'hashenishi, and the third, achidushim shechideshu min ha-mishnah hachmei kol dor. Right? What are the new laws that developed since the times of the Mishnah in every single generation? ובירור הכללים והראיות שלמדו מהם. And also to analyze what rule did they use in order to substantiate their opinion. right? There's 13 different midot. Which midah did each Hacham use, and why did he use that one? And could there be a better argument to make using a different midah? And then how are we going to make halacha? So for bi'ur hakinanim v'harayot, what proofs did each person bring to support his opinion? V'hismicham l'divrei Tannaim, right? So they bring a proof, and they would try to connect it and say, this is what Rabbi Akiva said, right? This is what he meant when he said this phrase in the Mishnah. And so then there's deliberation between the Hachamim. And the Talmud comes to analyze each opinion and each discussion and each argument in order to reach a conclusion. Right? The statements that were mentioned, that were brought forth by the Tannaim in the Mishnah, right, until they settled the law and they set it as halacha according to Rabbi Akiva, and they actually set a general rule. Halacha ki Rabbi Akiva mehavero. Right? If you see a dispute between Rabbi Akiva and another Tana, so halacha is according to Rabbi Akiva. V'hagizerot, v'hatakanot, right? And all the decrees and all the enactments of the Hachamim shena'asu me'achar Rabbeinu HaKadosh ad zemano. Anything that was that developed from the times of Rabbeinu HaKadosh until his time. Right, so all this up until now, the first three we already saw earlier. The Harevi'i, and the fourth, and this is new to the Talmud, something that the Mishnah didn't have. Derashot hamat'imot le'inyan kol perek sheizdamen shera'ui bo haderash. Says the Talmud isn't just a book of law. The Talmud is a book for the Hachamim, and it includes a lot of teachings of the Hachamim. Could be derashot on the Pesukim, and we're not talking about Midrash Halacha anymore. If you guys remember the class we had on the oven of Achnai. The oven of Achnai was a dispute between the Hachamim and Rabbi Eliezer, right? And it was like a fantastic midrash with it was very bizarre, right? A tree was being uprooted magically from its base and flying away, right? A voice came from the heavens, right? All these midrashim that the Chachamim bring, right? So Rav Ashi also included not just like dry legal material, but also all sorts of these stories, all these midrashim. Le'inyan kol perek shizdamen shira'ui bo hadirash. Right? Any chapter is talking about a certain topic, or there's a discussion on a certain topic, and then it kind of, the Talmud will many times go out on a tangent and bring some sort of maybe because of a pasuk that was mentioned, or bring some sort of midrash that has to do with that pasuk, or some sort of story that has to do with either that person that was mentioned, if he isn't mentioned that often in the Talmud. And this fourth objective of the Talmud, right? The midrashim that are brought in the Talmud, you shouldn't think lightly of them. They're not just stories, or that they have little significance to them, right? You're not going to get much out of reading stories of the Hachamim. It says, don't think that. Because this they bring these midrashim for that they have a very great purpose. במשהו כולל מן הרמזים העמוקים והעניינים הנפלאים. Right? All of these midrashim, every single one of them, they allude to very subtle and deep ideas. And they are brought in a certain way that the Chachamim can decipher them. לפי שאם יעוין עיון מעמיק באותם הדרשות, יובן מהם מהטוב המוחלט מה שאין למעלה ממנו. Right? Because if you know how to analyze a midrash properly, and you delve deep into the wording and the story and the meaning of the midrash, from that you will generate great benefit. Tova muhlat, right, is the absolute truth and goodness, right? You will reach a very, very high level of your study. והתגלו מהם מן העניינים האלוקיים ועניינים אמיתיים ככל אשר הסתירו אנשי המדע. Right, and from them you can learn העניינים האלוקיים, things that have to do with metaphysics and even sciences. They teach science through midrashim. They teach secrets of the universe in a way, and also of the metaphysical world, all through these midrashim. Right? All their wisdom that they want to teach, they teach it through these midrashim. Right? Things that the scientists, the people of knowledge, they teach their wisdom in riddles. And this is what the midrashim come to teach us. And any words of wisdom that you may find in the books of philosophy, you'll find much more of them hidden within these midrashim. Right? But when you read these midrashim at their literal level, right? Sometimes you read these midrashim, these fantastic midrashim that completely go against all rationality and all logic and any way we're accustomed to experiencing the world, right? Where the Eliezer says, Im halacha kemuti, if halacha is according to my opinion, this carob tree will prove my point, and then somehow miraculously this carob tree was uprooted from its place and flew 100 meters away. Right? That's the literal meaning of the midrash. It defies all logic. It defies any of our experiences of the real world. That's why it's so fantastic. He says, but that's just on the literal level of the midrash. He says the Chachamim are coming to teach a very, very deep lesson. And we analyzed that midrash. And we saw that there's different types of arguments that the Chachamim were talking about. Right? And we said when it says Haruv ze yochia, Haruv is alluding to Horeb, Har Sinai. And he says when it was uprooted, it's because, well, the argument that you're bringing is uprooting a halakha that we received from Sinai. Right? Haruv ze yochiach says this haruv, this carob tree that will prove my point. And then the carob tree was uprooted and flew away. And even the distance, right, that it flew away, the wording there comes to allude to something else. And it was talking about the water. The water comes to hint to something else, right? And these are put together as riddles that only someone who's experienced in the words of the Hachamim and in deciphering their riddles will be able to approach these midrashim and extract very, very deep meaning from them. ועשו כך לעניינים נפלאים. And they did this for any kind of fantastic meaning, right? This is like the mysticism of Judaism, right? Mystical understanding of Judaism comes through these midrashim, only once you properly analyze them. And this is something extra that the Rav Ashi included in the Talmud. Right? He wanted to arouse the understanding of the students, right? Because the Talmud was written for the Hachamim. And so he also wants to challenge their thinking when they're coming to study the Talmud. And also, it's like a two-sided sword. On the one hand, it speaks to the Hachamim, and on the other hand, it shoos away the ignorant. Right? People who can't think deeply, people who can't make associations and delve deep into the midrashim, they say, this is nothing. And that's exactly what the Hachamim want. They want the ignorant people to stay away from their teachings. והחכמים עליהם השלום היו מסתירים זה מזה סתרי תורה. Right? The Hachamim, they would hide deeper meanings of the Torah from each other, because they weren't always sure that even though that they're all Hachamim, even though he's a colleague of mine, maybe his understanding isn't developed enough to understand something that I understood in the Sitei Torah, in the deeper meanings of the Torah. Right? Maybe, I have a great chidush on Genesis, on the creation of the world and the universe. But I see this other Hakam, he's a great legal authority, he has a great legal mind. However, when it comes to mathematics and astronomy, he has more to learn before he's ready for this certain idea that I have. So even when I communicate this idea, I'm going to communicate it in a riddle. If he's ready, if his scientific understanding is mature enough, he'll be able to figure it out. If not, then I didn't harm him by trying to teach him something that is above him. Because these aren't topics that you can teach. These are ideas you need to be able to develop on your own. And they're never taught in public. But they only speak about these in hints and riddles. Right? And if God took up the veil from a person's mind, someone who he found worthy of understanding the deeper secrets of the Torah and of the universe, right? Right? This has to be somebody who already put in the effort and made himself eligible through his studies and his knowledge. Right? If you haven't developed a certain level of mathematical understanding, right, certain concepts in physics you're never going to understand. If you did prepare yourself by studying all of these things, then God will, so to speak, he'll reveal his certain things to you. Right? מעל לב מי שרצוי לפניו, אחר שהכשיר עצמו בלימודים, right, after a person prepares himself intellectually, and he is worthy, God finds him worthy to understand these deeper secrets and meanings, then he will remove the barrier preventing him from understanding the midrashim. Yavin mehem lefikoach sichlo. Then he can understand in accordance to his intellectual development. ועוד שהלימוד לרבים לא ייתכן אלא בדרך חידה ומשל. He says, right, so the Talmud is going to be published. It's going to be accessible to the public. The only way you can teach these things to the public, right, because you don't want to come out and display, show all your cards to people who may be unworthy. They'll completely twist it out of context. They'll go down the wrong path. They'll misunderstand what you're trying to teach. So if you're going to put these teachings into a book that's accessible to the public, right, you can only do this in a way of riddles and parables. Right, you can't possibly teach these things to the public only with the use of riddles and parables. And this is what Shlomo at the beginning of the book of Mishle, I think in English is Celestia. I don't even know how to pronounce it in English. Mishle, one of the books of Shlomo, Yashir Ashirim, Mishle Kohelet, says Mishle, the word Mishle actually means parables, right? He says Mishle Shlomo ben David Melech Israel. The parables of Shlomo, the son of David, king of Israel. Mishle Shlomo ben David Melech Israel says Lehavin Mashal Umnisa, right? In the understanding of parables and riddles, Divrei Hachamim v'chidotam, right? The words of the Hachamim and their riddles, right? And he has a whole book. The whole book of Mishle is one riddle after another.
It's a proverb, I think.
Proverbs, right, Proverbs. The other one is Kohelet. You're right. ועל עניין זה רמז שלמה באומרו להבין משל ומניסה דברי חכמים וחידותם. וכשיראה משל ממשלהם, right? And when a person comes across one of these midrashim in the Talmud, שפשוטו רחוק מאוד מבינתו, right? That the understanding of this midrash is far away from his understanding. It goes right above him. Some of these midrashim we saw are fantastic. You read it and it makes no sense to you at all. ראוי לו להצטער מאוד על כך, right? You should be very sorry with yourself שלא הבין העניין עד שנעשו אצלו כל הדברים האמיתיים בתכלית הריחוק. You're right to the point where all these messages and all these teachings that the Hachamim are coming to teach you seem so far-fetched and out of your reach. Right? Go and prepare yourself more, right? With all the foundational information that you need in order to be able to analyze these midrashim. All right? Never skip the foundations, right? Whether it be logic, philosophy, sciences, mathematics, astronomy, right? All these things will help you understand the midrashim. And what we're studying here is the foundations of law, or the foundations of the philosophy of Jewish law. Right? When you understand all of these things and you reach these midrashim, these are the tools that'll help you to decipher the riddles of the Hachamim and generate real meaning from not just the midrashim, but also when you later approach the text of the Tanakh, of the Bible, especially go to Sefer Mishleh, the book of Proverbs, it's all midrashim there. It's midrashim there that has to do with human nature. Another thing very important, a very important, call it discipline to learn, that a lot of midrashim deal with, especially the book of Proverbs, is psychology, human psychology, right? The better, the more well-versed you are in all of these disciplines, the more tools you have to analyze and understand the riddles of the Hachamim. All right, so this is the fourth, and while it's not the primary objective of the Talmud, it's one of the most beneficial parts of the Talmud, aside from learning how to behave, what is mutar, right? What you're allowed to do, what is permissible, what is asur. There's also the much deeper meanings of the Hachamim, the wise men, right? Where their wisdom, we saw previously in previous classes, the wisdom encompassed science, psychology, mathematics, astronomy, and these are all the basis for understanding what the Chachamim call Ma'aseh Bereshit, right? Ma'aseh Bereshit is the understanding of how God created the world, meaning physics of the world, physics and astronomy and cosmology. And all that is the step to go beyond into the world of metaphysics, which is also what the Chachamim bring in the Midrashim. All right, any questions so far? Okay. We're reaching the end of this chapter. Tokef Talmud, the authority of the Talmud, or we'll call it, how do you call it? The validity of the Talmud. Nimsa Ravina v'Rav Ashi v'Chavreihem. We see Ravina and Rav Ashi, the last generation of the Amoraim, right, and all their colleagues. Sof Gedolei Chachmei Yisrael, המעתיקים תורה שבעל פה, ושגזרו גזרות והתקינו תקנות והנהיגו מנהגות, ופשטו גזרותם ותקנותם ומנהגותם בכל ישראל, בכל מקומות מושבותיהם. So we see that the last generation of Hachamim, who were certified to transmit the tradition from one generation to the next, and they had the authority to instruct and enact new laws and decree new laws, and for these laws to spread out and be accepted by the entire nation, the Jewish nation, b'chol mechomot meshuvoteihem, right, in all of their dwellings, right, wherever they be, was this last generation of Ravina in Rav Ashi. After that, there is no central authority that their instruction can spread out throughout the entire Jewish world. Does anybody remember why? What's changing now in the world? What would prevent the instructions of the court to reach all of the Jewish communities? Any ideas? Don't be shy.
The language,
Sorry?
the language,
Language, okay. Although we do still have essential language. The Hebrew language was always really, it always sort of stayed alive throughout all the Jewish communities. Although the Talmud wasn't written in Hebrew, it was written in Aramaic. So you do have a point there. Think of something that has been kind of following the Jewish people for the past 2,000 years. A
The
big
exile
barrier.
and the absence of the temple.
What's that?
The exile and the absence of the temple.
Right. So what's happening now in the exile? It says we know Jews as always being spread out all over the world, but they weren't always like that. Even here, in the times of Rav Ashi and Rav Ashi, most of the Jewish communities were centered around the land of Israel, right? The Middle East, North Africa a bit, and also throughout the Roman Empire, but much less throughout Europe. And then we have the wars between the Persians and the Greeks, and the boundaries, the borders between the empires keeps moving. And then we have very big wars between the Christians and the Muslims. And there is no proper communication between these two different worlds. So what's happening now, right, is that if up until now we could practice the Kala, right, and the Chachamim from all over can assemble in Babylon twice a year, the Kala is still continuing, but it's not getting as many representatives from as many communities. And so if we don't have an institute that can represent everybody from wherever they may be, then there's no validity to the decrees of that Supreme Court. You can't have a Supreme Court that only represents one community or 10 communities out of 100. The Supreme Court needs to reflect the entire Jewish community from wherever they may be. So the last generation whose instruction could really spread out throughout the entire Jewish community was Ravina and Rav Ashi and their generation and colleagues. Whatever they decreed spread out. Aval kol hadivarim shebetalmud habavli. So anything that you find in the Babylonian Talmud, hayavin kol Beit Israel lalechet bahem. Right? Any halacha that is brought in the Talmud is mandatory on all of the Jewish people. Everyone needs to follow the Talmud as the last Supreme Court that was representative of all Jewish communities. And therefore, וכופין כל עיר ועיר וכל מדינה ומדינה לנהוג בכל המנהגות שנהגו חכמים שבתלמוד. And therefore, everybody must, right, follow the instructions of the Talmud. Anything that was instructed in the Talmud is obligatory to everybody, right? Because there could be other Batei Dinim. You have a Beit Din, right, a court in Poland, and they come up with a new minhag. It doesn't contradict anything in the Talmud, but they saw fit to enact a certain law or to instruct a certain minhag. Their authority is limited to their area, to their community. Their instruction doesn't spread out to the rest of the courts and to the rest of the Jewish community. And so you can't force any other community to accept the instructions of a court in a different community. However, the Talmud's instructions spread out throughout the entire nation, and therefore everybody must revert always back to the instructions of the Talmud. וכופין כל עיר ועיר, וכל מדינה ומדינה לנהוג בכל המנהגות, right? Every city, every state, every community throughout the Jewish world, wherever they are, they must follow the instructions of the Talmud, because the Talmud was composed at a time where it reflected all Jewish communities and it spread out to all other Jewish communities. ולגזור גזירותם וללכת בתקנותם, right? And they must follow any gezerah that was instituted in the Talmud, and it obligates everybody. הואיל, why? הואיל וכל אותן הדברים שבתלמוד הסכימו עליהם כל ישראל, right? Because everything that was decreed in the Talmud was accepted, right? There always has to be a consensus, was accepted by the entire Jewish community. That is the number one rule and basis for all of Jewish law, and that even obligates God, as we saw. Why do we keep the mitzvot? What authority did God have to give us laws? It was because we freely contracted a covenant with God, and we accepted as a community all of the mitzvot that God wanted to give us. So same too with the Mishnah. What gave the Mishnah its supreme authority over any other Tannaim literature? It was that it was accepted by the entire Jewish community. And so too the Talmud, as a reflection of representatives from all Jewish communities around the world coming to the yeshivot in Babel, the Talmud itself was accepted by the entire Jewish nation and spread out to all communities around the world. Everything that is in the Talmud, הסכימו עליהם כל ישראל, right? The entire congregation of Israel accepted it upon themselves, and therefore it's mandatory to all of us. ואותן החכמים שהתקינו או שגזרו, and those חכמים in the Talmud that were able to enact a new law, or שהנהיגו, or come up with a new custom, או שדנו דין ולמדו שהמשפט כך הוא, right? Or there was an ambiguous law, right, that wasn't fully defined from the times of Moshe, and a new case came up, and the Hachamim convened, and they discussed what the law should be, and they decided that this is how the law should be, right? So these Hachamim in the Talmud, הם כל חכמי ישראל או רובן, right? It constitutes either the entire mass of the Hachamim or the majority of them. Once the majority of the Hachamim cannot partake in the Kala and in these discussions don't reflect the entire Jewish community, and they do not have the same authority as those that do reflect the entire Jewish community and spread out to them. Vehem, and these are the Chachamim in the Talmud, sheshameu hakabbalah be'ikare haTorah kulah. Right? They are the ones who received the tradition that was transmitted from one generation to another, right? On the mitzvot of the Torah. Ish mipi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu. One generation to the other, right? And we saw before how we traced back 40 generations from the times of Rav Ashi, right? Ravina and Rav Ashi, the publishers of the Talmud, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Sinai. So why does the Talmud, why is it mandatory for all Jewish communities and all Jewish families and apply to everybody? It's because of one thing. It is the latest institute, we'll call it. It's not even a book, it's an institute, because it reflects the Supreme Court, the last Supreme Court that was able to influence, or whose influence spread out throughout the entire Jewish nation, and whose decisions reflected the opinions of the entire Jewish nation. Understood? Any questions? Okay, one last paragraph. This is actually this is the only time I quote him. The Rosh. The Rosh is known as Rav Ashi. He was chief rabbi of Spain about 700 years ago. He actually is from Germany originally. He fled Germany, right? He fled for his life after his master, his rabbi, was thrown in jail and eventually died in jail in Germany. He fled and he went to Spain and he became chief rabbi of Spain. Actually, from my grandmother's side, I'm actually descendant of the Rosh, although I usually follow more of the teachings of the Rambam than the Rosh. Umistabra, it says, as it turns out, שכל תוספתה שלא נתפשטה עד אחר סידור הגמרא. He's talking about what authority is there to anything, any literature, whether it be Tannaim even, or Amoraim, meaning even things before the Talmud and before the Mishnah, although he's talking about specifically things after the Talmud, what authority do they have? שכל תוספתה שלא נתפשטה עד אחר סידור הגמרא, right? Any baraita, any of the Tanaic literature that there may be that didn't spread out throughout the entire nation until after the publication of the Talmud, right? There could be certain books of Midrashim that were in existence that may or may not have been written in the times of the Tannaim, the times of Rabbi Akiva, the times of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, right? But they didn't spread out until much later, after the Talmud itself was published. It says, Dilav Disamchahi, right? It is not something you can rely on for legal purposes. Demistama, Kevan, Sheratzu Chachmei Israel Asok Chibur Kayama Emet, Hakru V'darshu V'chizru Lida Kol HaSefarim Shenichtavu Al Divrei Chachamim. All right, because what happened was, basically what the Talmud did, one of its projects was authenticating traditions, right? And so when they came to authenticate everything and put everything in one official publication that was spread out, they went over any literature that existed at their time, and they either authenticated it or they didn't. And if they did, then it was included in the Talmud. And if they didn't, then it wasn't included in the Talmud. And so therefore, since it's not included in the Talmud and doesn't reflect the decisions of the final Supreme Court, then you can't rely on them to make halakha, to make pesak halakha. All right, kivan shiratzu hachmei Israel la'asot chibur kayama emet, right? Since when they wanted to make one published book that reflects the truth of the Hachamim, so they searched and they discussed every single piece of literature that existed at their time. Lida kol hasefarim shenichtavu al divrei hachamim, right? That were written by the Chachamim or were written as an interpretation of the words of the Chachamim. Ubireru otam, right? And so they analyzed them in order to authenticate them, shehem bar samcha, right? In order to make them something we can rely upon for halakha. And so that is what is in the Talmud. and if it didn't make its way into the Talmud Bavli, then you can't rely on it as a source of Jewish law. And that is the end of this chapter, which ends the era of the Amoraim, the Hachamim that are mentioned in the Talmud, which ends basically with the publication of the Talmud by Ravina in Rav Ashi, or really the son of Rav Ashi, who we'll see in the next era next week.